Daddy to go to Japan to pick up the black belts or what?
No, not the belts. He went to Japan for all of this monster footage in the 23rd episode of the all-new Mighty Morphin Zyurangers. The Yoke's on You and Tears of a Subterranean Beast. There's not too much you can glean about these respective plots from the titles alone, but one thing you probably can pick up on is a marked difference in tone. The Power Rangers title is an egg pun, and there is no shortage of puns in this episode.
It looks like Fang is cracking up!
He's really in a bind.
It's clearly not trying to take itself seriously. Tears of a Subterranean Beast, the Zyuranger title, suggests an outing far more subdued. This is definitely the kind of pair I created this video series to compare. It's a lot of the same footage, it's very roughly the same story. However, by changing some of the more important details, as well as tweaking the types of music and dialogue, a wildly different tone can be established. Power Rangers opens on a talent show, which has nothing to do with anything other than killing time at the beginning and end, and serving as the excuse to make Tommy late. He and Jason are giving a martial arts performance. Tommy left their belts behind, and while going to fetch them, putties capture him in a net trap.
He's really in a bind.
Yeah, I get it. Thanks, Trini. The real plot involves Finster secretly making a monster to celebrate Rita's birthday. It's Fang, and you can say his biggest strength, or weirdest flaw, is his obsession with Goonie bird eggs, his favorite snack, which Squad and Babu eat without knowing. This drives him into a rage, especially when the villains promise they'll give him more Goonie bird eggs if he defeats the Power Rangers. Which he presumably would have done anyway, right? There are clearly a few holes here, and that's because this was altered very heavily. In Zyuranger, we are introduced to Goda by way of frightened hunters trying to kill it. And it's Goda, not Dora Goda. This is not a Dora monster.
Mosada!
See, even Don knows. I guess he read the monster's subtitle. Leprechaun does not create Goda. In fact, he's not even in this episode. So all of that Finster footage had to be pulled from other episodes. It's not Bondora's birthday. Well, I guess it could be. Maybe she just doesn't like to talk about it. Goda is simply a monster of legend who has reappeared after a recent series of earthquakes. While everyone is initially hostile towards it, the Zyurangers soon realize that Goda is a mother who is protecting her eggs. So yeah, when Totepot and Bookbok eat these eggs, they aren't horning in on someone else's snack, they're eating her children. The villains, however, are able to convince her it was the Zyurangers, thus leading to her roaring rampage of revenge. Power Rangers has really struggled against any effort by Zyuranger to use an antagonist who is not a Dora monster. In the other cases we've seen, they've bent over backwards to make them Rita creations, and this is clearly no exception. This also comes part and parcel with stripping these creatures of any humanity, for lack of a better term, and sympathy. In two of these cases, including this one, they're simply re-edited into baddies who get the same thumping as everybody else, and in the other, the whole thing ends up being a dream. This show never really wants anybody to question whether these villains deserve to be fought. They just want cool action scenes. Goda becoming Fang requires so much recontextualizing that I find it very interesting how each series deals with it. Obviously, the villains having to make deals with and trick Fang suddenly makes sense when you understand who Goda is. Usually, Rita's monsters just do her bidding. They don't have to be goaded into it. I have no regrets. If they can make terrible puns, so can I. There's also the fact that Fang even has a favorite snack and has been able to procure it in the few seconds he's existed. Admittedly, I don't think I ever picked up on that as a little kid, so it's one of those tenuous grasps on reality that tonally fits with this type of show. Goda is designed in a very specific way. Most of these monsters are ugly to a certain degree, but they go out of their way here to make Goda grotesque, particularly with these darting, beady eyes. One of the lessons of the episode is the Zyurangers feeling guilty for prejudging Gota based on how she looks. Power Rangers takes that same design and decides it bears a passing resemblance to actor Peter Lorre, and so gives him a stereotypical Peter Lorre voice.
You ate my Goonie bird eggs!
Which also adds to the kitsch. By contrast, Gota doesn't speak at all, communicating entirely through body language. That significantly changes how the character is perceived. Gota is a misunderstood animal who grieves and rages, off-puttingly alien but ultimately relatable. She's akin to the Horta in Star Trek's classic episode Devil in the Dark, who is revealed to also be lashing out because uncaring humans are unknowingly murdering her children. Fang, by contrast, is brash and quippy with a voice that is literally a genre parody. All of these changes culminate in the scene that is most emblematic of both episodes. There is so much detail put into the eyes of this costume that it can even cry, which Gota does. When she's in private, she cries over the empty shells she failed to protect. Again, since she can't talk, elements like these are how she communicates to the audience. And to the Zyurangers, who stumbled across this scene and come to the realization that they were wrong about her. Aside from the presence of the Zyurangers, all of this footage is used in Power Rangers, but it feels completely different.
My Goonie bird eggs! They ate my Goonie bird eggs!
By having changed the context into something trivial, and now by putting in goofy music and a whiny voice, this same scene is now played for comedy. He's humorously pathetic rather than sympathetically pathetic. Now, I'm not here to say that one is better than the other. Wait, what am I saying? That's the whole reason I'm here. But it might surprise you to hear that I don't think one approach is inherently better than the other. Obviously, I'm more predisposed to preferring a conflict with emotional stakes, and I really have to try not to simply say that Power Rangers has stripped all substance out of this. However, I will try to be objective here. Power Rangers is simply doing what it sets out to do 5 days a week, which is provide an entertaining monster to be beaten. That's what most of Zyurangers episodes do too. This is Zyuranger adding a little something extra. But how well does it pull that off? First off, I'm flabbergasted that we're doing eggs again. We just had the dinosaur eggs feature 2 episodes ago. I don't have anything against them, but I feel this episode is diminished by its proximity to that. This episode even briefly references an event from that one. It feels less like a recurring theme than it does a worn-out repetition. At the very least, you'd think the villains, comic relief though they might be, would be wary of giant weird-looking eggs that heavily resemble the ones they were just looking for. Power Rangers may or may not be weaker for having all but cut that plot, but it does make this episode feel more unique. I mentioned the Zyurangers have to come to terms with their prejudice against Gota. Now, the Star Trek episode I compared it to earlier ends with the crew of the Starship Enterprise realizing their prejudice, learning to communicate, and brokering a peace. With that set up, you'd think Zyuranger would work out that way too. After all, that's what happened with Jin and Fairy Dondon. But this time, that's not the case. See, Bandora appears to Gota as she's crying over her eggs, offering to use her magic to repair them if she destroys the Zyurangers. Gota apparently agrees to this, as Bandora declares that Gota has sold her soul to her. Later on, when Ippei, the kid of the week, tries to return an egg he'd salvaged, Gota is unmoved and tries to step on both of them, despite her saving his life at the beginning of the episode. She's too far gone now. Geki can try to reason with Gota all he wants, but as Bandora ridicules them for, their kindness is going to get them killed. On top of that, she orders Gota to break a dam that's going to wipe out an entire village. Ultimately, Barai appears and convinces Geki that he has to kill Gota for the greater good. He calls back to that earlier action figure lesson, that there is joy in new life, and that is the only callback that kind of works, that Gota's remaining egg will have to be her legacy. Better still, Barai delivers the actual theme of the episode, that some tragedies simply cannot be avoided. And given that this is the last episode before his storyline moves full speed ahead to its inevitable conclusion, it's all the more fitting that he gets to deliver this lesson. Clearly, Power Rangers has none of this. All of Geki's pleading with Goda is rewritten for Jason into quips or generic encouragement to his team. After all, this is just any other monster fight.
They want eggs!
I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, of course not. There's no connection here. It is followed, though, by this odd exchange.
You don't stop fighting, we're gonna have to make you stop.
That's so weird. This feels like it fits much more in line with the Zyuranger plot than this one. How often do the Power Rangers offer not to kill the monster? It makes me wonder if there were stages in the writing where they had attempted to carry the original motivation over, and that this is a relic of an earlier draft. Then again, we've seen awkwardness in this conversion, so it could be more of that. Here's what caught me off guard, though. On paper, everything I said about Zyuranger promises an emotional finale that brings the house down. That's how I remembered it. Unfortunately, its awkward execution robs it of a lot of the pathos it should have had. I've heard it said that it's difficult to do war films, particularly those attempting to impart a message of the horrors of war. That's because it's all too easy for filmed battle scenes to come across as thrilling, which undermines the message. Despite Geki's insistence on bringing Goda's egg to her, he shoos the egg-carrying boy away. Instead, they immediately summon their cool giant robots while the cool giant robot music plays, and they get into a cool giant robot fight. The consequences of the dam are left entirely in the abstract. We don't see any terrified extras or crying children whose lives will be snuffed out, the kind of collateral damage that would get Geki's justice sense tingling and force him to turn on Goda. Heck, he's on board with the let's kill Goda plan before Bandora even brings the dam into the equation. Geki is won over far too early, after which all the tension is deflated. At that point, it becomes a standard Sentai fight, which, as I established, is cool, not emotional. The timing here is all wrong. Geki should have held out hope until the very last minute, until Goda is actually damaging the dam, which never actually happens in the episode. Put Geki on Burai on ideologically opposed sides. Have Daijujin briefly fight Dragon Caesar to defend Goda from him. Wring as much melodrama out of this as you can. If nothing else, Zyuranger's usually pretty good when it comes to heaping on the melodrama. Here, it's just business as usual. And that's why Power Rangers ends up with a surprising advantage here. Its entire mindset this episode is business as usual. There's nothing special about any of this. It's painfully average. And yet, that makes the footage actually fit this episode far better.
Guess we took care of you, frog face.
This is the kind of footage you quip to, the kind of monster you don't grieve over, the kind of conflict devoid of dilemma. Power Rangers changes the ending using the Ultra Zord instead of Zyuranger's Goryujin, and that's because you throw in some more cool giant robots, some more cool wailing guitars, and you've amped up the feeling this episode is going for. It would have been an even bigger mistake in Zyuranger, but it totally fits Power Rangers. This is far harder than I thought it would be. I came into this convinced Zyuranger had this in the bag. And on paper, it totally does. However, it's the same conundrum I've occasionally talked about in Dragon Ball Dissection. What is ultimately better? A pedestrian plot that accomplishes its pedestrian goals? Or an ambitious plot that fails to cross the finish line? Well, due to my arbitrary rules, today that comes down to how they fare in 3 different categories. Hopefully that'll make it easier for me. For story, I'm hard-pressed to concede Power Rangers has much of one. Like I said, its civilian and monster plots have no connection. Power Rangers are summoned to fight a monster, they do, the end. Zyuranger's problems are in its execution, but it has a much stronger story at its core. Even taking into account those differences in tone, Zyuranger wins. For characters, if nothing else, Zyuranger knocks it out of the park with Burai. His monologue is a pivotal moment in this episode, but also for his story arc as a whole. Goda is also a tragic monster deserving of sympathy. As much as I love a good Peter Lorre voice, Peter Lorre often portrayed pitiable villains, which Fang is not. Zyuranger wins. Finally, for action, I think I have to fall back on what I said earlier. Power Rangers uses its action in a manner far more consistent with its episode. I don't know why this was out of Zyuranger's reach. Maybe they were tightening their budget for the big events coming up. Regardless, it just doesn't work. Power Rangers wins. Unfortunately, that's not enough to keep Zyuranger from taking the overall win. Perhaps that was a bit more didactic than I usually am with these videos, but I had a lot of fun with this. I just think it's very instructive in how to build or tear down tone. Clearly, they should teach this in film school. This video should be taught in film schools. Well, I've exhausted my self-confidence for the next few months. Now I'm going to retreat into a cocoon of self-consciousness for daring to say something so self-aggrandizing. I'll see you next time. Ignore me. Just look at the list of the peoples. Thank the peoples. Thank you, peoples. Another day, another test shot. This is me. Am I in focus? Can I read the teleprompter? I don't know. What crazy things are gonna happen today? I'm not even mic'd up yet. Oh, my bearing's looking okay. I don't know. I can't see myself. Only the camera knows. Record this. MMJU 23 Part 1 Take 1. Action. Do 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 do. They don't have to be goaded into it. I've nibbed up. Here's what caught me off guard, though. On paper, everything I said about Zyuranger promises an emotional finale. That wasn't. The overall win. All right, here I got to do some acting. Well, I've exhausted my self-confidence for the next few months. Now I'm going to retreat into a cocoon of self-consciousness for daring to say something so... No, God, you're just reading.